Hi, I'm Jesse Hirsh. Welcome to MetaViews. Recorded live in front of an automated audience. And today, we're going to get into the chaos of our moment with the fascist fourth and fifth estate. A fun alliteration on my part, but I'm joined by my good friend Rick Salutin to kind of break down this moment in media, in politics, in society. And, you know, Rick, we like to start every show with the news, partly because MetaViews publishes a daily newsletter, and today's issue is what I call the illusion economy. And it kind of gets into the distance between the marketing of AI and the substance of AI. You know, had Trump not been elected, I was predicting that the AI bubble would burst right about now. But of course, with Trump in the White House, bullshit reigns. And that means that AI is very much going to continue in its meteoric pace, especially with the state support that was announced this week. But really, Rick, the purpose of our news segment is to give an opportunity to our guest to share some news. It's meant to be spontaneous, intuitive. This could be personal news. This could be world news. The challenge, of course, is many of the guests we have are not news consumers. They're not people who necessarily...
I'll step into that. Yeah, no, I'm a news consumer.
Yes, this is where you are very much both intellectually and professionally engaged in the news milieu. So the question fundamentally is, what do you have your eyes on that you think our audience should be paying closer attention to?
I'm sort of pleased with the way Canadian politics, federal politics is going at the moment. I thought we're just going to have to suffer through another kind of latter day coming of Brian Mulroney. But it's at least got shaken up now, and we don't know what's going on. And it's just nice not to know how it's going to come out. I did not think that Justin Trudeau was the devil.
You didn't want to fornicate with him. You didn't fly a...
No, I did not. But I think he was wackier than we thought. We knew he was wacky, and it was endearing. You know, he did nutty stuff, like he got into that boxing match with the Conservative member.
I want to say Brazeau.
Yeah, something, yeah. And he had a sort of a tendency to have outbursts in the House of Commons, like he yelled at Peter Kent that he was a piece of shit. And those were his good moments. Like, those are his endearing moments, because anybody could identify. But he always reverted to that high school drama teacher persona. And it was so irritating. You know, when he was in there, you never wanted to hear a word from him again. But he was wacky. He was not psychotic. He was not, but like that India trip that he took with his family was really beyond words, really. It was all pictures, in fact. So I think he did have to go, and he wasn't going to go. And Polievre built his whole campaign on two things. One, Justin Trudeau is responsible for everything bad that is happening in the world. And the second one was axe the carbon tax. So now Justin is gone, and the contenders to replace him are going to axe the tax themselves before Pierre gets a chance to do it. So we don't know what's going to happen. And I think it's at least it's re-engaged me in that one. I can tell by which news shows I switch to while I'm cooking or whatever it is. And if I go to the BBC or the American Nets, it's because things are just not interesting here. But I'm actually spending, grim as it is, I'm spending more time on CBC and CTV than I was. So, there's that to say.
And I think we are going to, as part of our conversation today, I think dig into why Canadian politics is particularly interesting right now for a range of reasons. And it struck me that while Justin Trudeau probably saw himself as a kind of social media politician, at least on the superficial or kind of image side, you know, where Polievre has kind of built his own Potemkin village is around authenticity. Like on the one hand, he's the most fake professional politician, cardboard, you know, two-dimensional personality, but he has somehow, you know, created the grift that he is, you know, like the convoy supporters, you know, salt of the earth. And I'm not sure how long that's going to last. I'm not sure that that is going to survive the test of a campaign that's not all about Trudeau.
No, and the campaign is it's in contrast to Trudeau or whoever else the opposition is that he gets support. He's not an endearing fellow, except for that weird breed of basically young conservatives, a bizarre term in itself, I think.
Although I think the core appeal there, because he is, I think, quite repulsive, he's a troll.
Yes,
and there
exactly.
are a lot of young conservatives who love trolls.
Absolutely. No.
Right?
And they better, because they haven't got anything else to say as far as I can see.
Right. Yeah.
I pay close attention to them. They seem bright, mostly white, and male.
Yeah.
And they love him because he's like them.
Yes. Well, and you know, we are going to get into the F word today in terms of fascism. That while he is not, I think, at this moment openly fascist, he is a gateway drug, right? He certainly helps normalize, right, you know, the far right.
No, and politics. It's the nastiness, the meanness, the ability to just smirk while somebody shudders.
Yes. So our second kind of opening segment that we have on every episode is called WTF, or What's the Future? Obviously a riff on what the fuck. So you could think of it as what the fuck is the future?
Thanks for pointing that out.
We have some American listeners, right? So it's important to me that I spell everything out. One of my greatest...
It is a stupid and ignorant population, but it is not their fault.
Oh, absolutely. And not only that, I would say further that there is a real desire to learn. And what we have as an opportunity as part of the podcast revolution is provide some of our counter view, our counter environment, our counter perspectives to our American friends and comrades. But there is a phrase that keeps ringing through in my head, which is, you know, no one ever went bankrupt underestimating the intelligence of the United States.
That rings in my head too, quite often.
Yes. So I ask you, Rick, what do you see on the event horizon? Right? What in the future, and it doesn't have to be positive or negative, could be personal, could be societal, but what do you see when you look out your window?
Well, I see good stuff. And to my surprise, because my son, who's now 26, has been in the process of persuading me that I am the most hopeful and optimistic person he knows. I always thought it was the opposite, but I think he has the evidence on his side. I mean, when 9/11 happened, the first column I wrote for the Globe and Mail after 9/11 was, great, this is an opportunity to solve the hardest problem in the world, which is the Mideast. And
I mean, that didn't work out too well, but it was the right idea.
No, I was not yet.
Yeah.
Not yet. And similarly with October 7th in Gaza, again, I thought, okay, it's back on the agenda, and it's a chance to do something. I amaze myself because I was convinced I'd go to my grave snarling and dour. What I think has happened that's really encouraging in the last year, which has in a way been the year of Gaza for me, year and a half, is that a narrative that I grew up with, which was a very, very false one, basically, which was that the Zionist narrative, that basically
Yeah.
I consider myself in a certain way a Zionist, in the sense that Israel has the right to, Jewish people have the right to have a country the way everybody else does. It does lead to racism. It does lead to problems. It's inconsistent, and yet you make do. But the narrative has been that the heroic Jewish state, which was under siege by anti-Semites, et cetera, et cetera. This is what Pankaj Mishra, the Indian writer, describes as the dominant Western narrative, which is a story of anti-Semites and racists gradually being beaten back during the Second World War and then the Cold War and all that. And he says the alternate narrative is that these people who were the good guys were actually the dominators. And from a third world perspective, which is the majority of the world, the real narrative has been the attempt by countries led by the United States to control, dominate, and kick the shit out of the rest of the world. What I am amazed at, I started writing about this question, the Mideast and Israel, during the second Lebanon invasion in 1981. I wrote a piece in Maclean's, which was then a big deal, called Hitler's Last Laugh, that the Jewish state had become a kind of parody of what it thought it was. And it changed my life. I've had trouble. I've made.
You mean the response and the reaction?
Yeah. It just came down on me like a hammer. Being critical of Israel has been much harder than being a leftist, a socialist, a revolutionary. None of that matters. They don't give a damn. You can attack the Pope. You can do anything, but don't attack the state of Israel. But what's happened is somehow in the last year and a half, that narrative hasn't been supplanted, but there's now a counter narrative beside it.
Yes.
It's driving people in power nuts. Has a lot to do with a huge amount to do with social
TikTok,
media.
Fundamentally, I think that's why TikTok fell into the crosshairs, was it absolutely subverted the American discourse on Israel, 100%.
I should watch more TikTok.
It's changed, unfortunately. What happened last Sunday with this Trump, false flag operation where they took TikTok off for 15 hours and then brought it back up saying, "Thank you, President Trump." Users in the United States have noticed a marked difference in how TikTok operates, in the content they're seeing, in the stuff that trends out. But previous to that, it was arguably a leftist platform, where a lot of radical voices were finding a global audience in a way that those American voices, quite frankly, had always been suppressed.
And I don't even think of them, this is partly dreamy on my part, but I don't see them as particularly radical. I see them, I see that an empirical common sense response. You just look at those pictures, come on.
But that's what a radical would say. But I agree entirely. Right? This is the irony of fascism is it's based on lies. It's based on bullshit. And the paradox is this is right when liberalism, even neoliberalism, was embracing evidence-based policy. And
let me give you an alternate idea about fascism.
Go ahead.
Which I have been brought to by my son.
And I don't want to drop the Zionist piece. I'm going to come back to that because I think that's significant.
Just say,
go ahead.
But Gideon, when we've talked, he works at a think tank in the UK, and he says, "Look, the truth is, the fascists said a lot of things that were true, that people were miserable, that they had been that the peace after World War I was terrible for the defeated, that unemployment and housing, all of this and stuff." He says they say all these things that actually make sense and that people perk up, And then they go crazy and they say, so the answer is kill all the Jews.
Yeah. Or the answer is violence, right?
Yes,
Because
yes, the answer is violence. The answer
that
is
is
racism.
their medium.
The answer is, the race, the evil race.
Yeah,
So we got to kill them all. And
and to your point, and I want to come back briefly to the Zionism piece, we can explore this later in the conversation. Fascism's ascent to power is based on a critique of capitalism.
Yep.
Right? It's the right wing's critique of the way in which liberalism and neoliberalism, with unrestricted wealth accumulation, becomes an unjust society in which you have a lot of people with legitimate grievances. To your point, the solutions they offer don't actually address the problem.
No, they're not in the same universe.
Yeah. They're on Mars, as we're starting to find out. You were going to say.
And they're smarter than us. What's going on now with this round of, I don't think of it as populism, although, or it is populism.
Well, no. But
it's right populism, not left.
But hold on, this is a good opportunity. The center calls it populism because the center is jealous of their popular support, right? But it's not populism because it does not reflect policies that serve the populace, that serve the people.
Well, I think it's right. Yeah, that's right. But as long as people think its policies will answer it, and they're smart with immigration and stuff like that.
But I got to push back also on the idea that they're smart. I've always considered myself a left-wing populist. And unfortunately, I am on the hinterlands, the margins of contemporary political discourse.
Bernie Sanders, that's okay.
I'm further out than Bernie Sanders, and I don't mean that I have different politics than him. I mean, he has a platform. You and I today are speaking with my mom, my dad, and a few other friends, and that's fundamentally it. I'm leaving this up there for the kids of the future who will discover this after the fact.
Yes, but
if I could make my point quickly, I'll throw back to you. And as good Jews, we will talk over each other and bounce back and forth. I think the left is smart, but not the left in power. Right? The left that is marginalized, the left that with myself for my entire life has always been, no, shut up, stay in your lane. That's technology. Don't talk politics. Right? And that's where, to bring it back to Zionism, I too felt, and it's paradoxic to say this because October 7th was a tragedy, but I did feel a room in the narrative, a space in the narrative open up that allowed us to talk about Zionism critically as Jews. And, be like, not in our own name. And even the way colonialism as a word has kind of come back in a more, like, not colonialism of the past, but colonialism of the present, especially in American discourse. I find encouragement. I find optimism in that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had not expected to see that opening in my lifetime. I just didn't think it would happen. It had such a grip that, and the use of the term anti-Semitism to beat off any criticism, and yet, and it just seems to have, it hasn't vanished, but it's really on the defensive, and there is an equally strong and more convincing narrative of the sort that Pankaj Mishra talks about, the third world perspective.
Yeah. So this is why I kind of felt in a provocative manner, I wanted to title this episode the role of the fourth and fifth estate in fascism, because where you and I share in common is this is paradoxical, a joy, a passion in analyzing the narratives in the media and analyzing the way these narratives kind of move. And you just hit a big one, which is the way in which anti-Semitism has been used to prevent any debate around Zionism, to prevent any criticism of Zionism. And, Jesse Brown, who is a big Canadian podcaster, he's been doing that. He's lost a lot of credibility because he continues to use anti-Semitism as a blunt instrument to attack anyone who's critical of Zionism. And that, again, he is someone who, under normal circumstances, has a lot of critical thinking, and it really tries to facilitate dialogue. So I'm curious from your perspective, both in the context of Zionism, but also in the larger context of Trumpism and MAGA. to what extent are we seeing a transformation of the role in media in society? And the way that media in society, certainly not overnight. You and I have been talking about this for a couple of decades now, but it does feel, especially with the way in which the tech titans and the social media people were front and center at the inauguration, that we're almost entering kind of a new world of state media. Even though it doesn't resemble the old world. This isn't Pravda. But again, there's interesting parallels here, so I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Well, I don't have any real anything much to add there. I think that the question, I think we are in a potentially very fertile situation. The question is, how do you grasp it? I mean, you and I have nothing to do. We can claim no credit for this new consciousness that arose. I think just human beings looked at the feeds on their devices, and they said, "Well, this is nuts. This is, okay. October 7th was an atrocity, but it was a more or less garden variety atrocity of the sort that happens in the world from quite frequently." Whereas the Israeli response was on its own level. I mean, it wasn't the worst thing that ever happened, but it was on a much more massive, nauseating level, even more nauseating level.
Yeah.
And that you can't make it drives me nuts, the attempts to make an equivalence between October 7th and what's happened since then. You can deplore both and recognize that they are of a different character.
Well, one should deplore both. That's an interesting kind of a metric of our moment, but please continue.
Yeah, no, so all I'm saying is people came to that by themselves. So it's not hopeless, and the domination of the media has never been hopeless. But the question is there any way to seize that and move it into the realm of formal politics and social decision making? And I'm really not sure what that is. But then I don't think it's not on us to come up with that. Then you just hope that it works out.
So, on the one hand, I share that desire for humility, that absolution of guilt and anxiety, that you're right, it's not up to us. But then, Rick, there are few intellectuals like us who have read Harold Innis. There's more who have read Marshall McLuhan, not that they understood the guy. But there aren't a lot of people who approach media with a political economy. And those who do, especially in academia, are not incentivized to think about what comes next. And I think, to your point about impacting policy, part of the social media debate has always been, these are just clicks, these are just likes, this is just slacktivism. And I had a really interesting conversation yesterday around here on the podcast. Check it out for everyone listening. Around the power of community, right? And the power of solidarity and the power of organizing. And that brings me, and I'm all over the place, but this is how we tend to talk. What really upsets me about Jagmeet Singh and the NDP is, like Trudeau, they are playing a very symbolic social media game, and they're not actually building community. They're not actually building networks. They're not actually mobilizing in the way that politics needs to be. They're thinking that it's just about ideas, which just draws them to the center rather than being an effective alternative. Thoughts?
Yeah, and fortunately, also, they are not building any kind of success. I mean, in the short term, it would be nice to stymie Polievre and keep him stuck at the level of a minority government, something like that. And as the NDP goes down, there's the chance of, and the Greens have been dreadful. So, so you're left with the Liberals, which is sort of what has been the case in Canada all along. But I would say, I don't mean to say that there's no role. I do sort of believe in the ring of truth, that in spite of all the cacophony of bullshit, I think that's what happened with the social media and Gaza, that it just, there was a ring of truth to a critical point of view. All of the mass media and most of the sort of influential stuff on the internet was the old story, the old narrative. But somehow these pictures got through.
Yeah.
And some testimonies. So I think if you just keep saying what you just keep trying to tell the truth as you see it and hope that it resonates.
And if I'm going to try to create a through line of our conversation today, we've sort of acknowledged the power of narrative. We acknowledged that part of what October 7th created was room for new narratives, room for different narratives. So let me bring you to something you wrote about recently, but I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on it as a power, as a narrative, the manifest destiny idea of America. And I say this because it does seem to be a story that's infecting the people in power, but it's also a story that seems to be rattling Canada to its core and maybe creating new opportunities for new Canadian narratives.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, the last time this happened was the free trade debate in the late 80s. And it was quite remarkable. I mean, I got on board. I'm not sure why, but it changed my life it changed my life in a lot of ways. And I remember when we set up a coalition, and we used to have big concerts and rallies in Massey Hall, which nobody on the left had ever tried to fill before. And I remember during the first one, we did a couple of them there, more than a couple. But I remember standing at the front of the hall as it filled up with people, and the reporters looking up at them and saying, Jesus, people really care about this. You just don't know. I think we made, we made a big mistake, I think, or maybe it was just of the time. We chose to treat the free trade deal that the U.S. was imposing on us as a reprise of the War of 1812. The Americans were invading us. And we chose not to emphasize the fact that this was basically a corporate assault on society, really.
Do you think that kind of rests on John Turner, though?
On the contrary, Turner was a response to it. Turner was heroic and noble for the one time in his life. If you're right once, it's good to be right on a good thing.
But my point is, his narrative wasn't really attacking the corporate side. It was, to your point, rewaging 1812.
Yeah,
and this is why, on the one hand, I don't disagree with you that we may be left with the liberals as the alternative to Polievre. But I keep feeling that the liberals are ideologically, morally bankrupt.
They are the last free traders. They are the last neoliberals.
But more than that, I kind of feel that their narrative, especially outside of their own, again, my own bias here is I have met people from across the political spectrum in my life, and never have I met more ambitious people than members of the Federal Liberal Party. Right? Like, they are not, in my experience, they are driven more by their personal ambition than they are ideology.
Absolutely.
And this is why I just don't feel, in an era as conflicted and as desiring authenticity, that the liberals have a chance in hell, other than how they continue to get elected, which is we're not the other guys.
Well, and that they have no principles, so that they can just shift to any position. But that's not bad. If you have a strong social movement and somehow the popular will is going in an enlightened way, they'll go over there. Yeah. So that's not a bad thing to have. I mean, I even think Doug Ford, who the hell thought he was going to come out the way he has? He's been awful in some ways, but not in all the ways we expected.
Well, Doug Ford is, your classic retail politician, where if we had equal access, right? Like, he wants to make friends with whoever's in the room. So if we had more access to him, absolutely, we'd be getting more out of him. And props to Olivia Chow, who she has figured out a way to work with him in a way that I don't think John Tory ever would have.
But that's in a way good. It means you don't have to join the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. You just have to do what you can to shape the environment in which they're operating. And then their antennae will pick up, we should go in this direction.
So then, for the sake of case example in history, give me a brief unpacking of that Massey Hall event and what it took to put that together. And I say this because I'm broke as fuck, but there have been times where I've so been tempted just to rent a hall because I felt that it would be easy to strike a chord, and there's so much hunger right now for at the least, like, fucking podcasts. Successful podcasts are selling out tours because people want to show up and do this thing. So give me a little bit of the case example of how that played out.
Well, what happened there, and we almost won. I mean, we won the vote, but because of our stupid system, Mulroney got a minority of votes, but he got a majority of seats. And that was a mistake we made too. We discussed whether we should push for a referendum on free trade, and we didn't have the confidence in the population to do it. We thought we have a better chance with electing the Liberals and the NDP to stop the deal, and we were wrong. But we did gather a consensus, a majority consensus in the country. And the way it doesn't work to just rent a hall. And at least it won't get you where you want to go. What you need is a coalition approach. And that was a massive coalition that I don't think there's been.
But here's I think the paradox. Give me a sense of who was in that coalition and whether they still exist now, or if they do exist, whether they are politically engaged in that manner as they were then.
Pretty much, it's a different constellation, but it's still, they weren't that engaged. I mean, we had a fight with the mainstream labor movement and the NDP. The NDP were hell to deal with because they didn't want the free trade issue, which is the equivalent of the corporate issue today, to eclipse. The NDP didn't want the free trade issue to eclipse the social welfare issue.
Sure.
Because they thought it would cut for the Liberals and they would lose seats to the Liberals.
Which they're probably quite right about that.
Yeah. And they didn't care enough about the country, as no party does. To override their own interests. But, and the labor movement was conflicted. And we had to work with people, and you have to find people who work. The National Farmers Union, and I forget, there's an agricultural association, or there was anyway. Artists, writers were very important, and they all have their organizations. So you can work with their organizations and try to get them to deal with their members. We didn't succeed very fully in that either, in the sense that we had the largest coalition that anybody had ever put together. However, it was mostly the leaderships that were involved, not the memberships.
Right.
And that's hard to do because, and it's even harder to do now. Probably.
I was going to say and it's even, there's a certain question of legitimacy that, ends up being put on the table if you just have the leaders and you don't have,
completely.
widespread
It's
support.
Elite. It's a coalition of elites.
But the other dynamic to this, of course, is we live in a different media environment. And while I fundamentally believe in the power of narrative, and this is why trolls can be so effective, because you don't actually need a lot of people to seed and launch and distribute a powerful narrative. But we are in a media environment that skews heavily right-wing. And part of what Zuckerberg just announced in the wake of the inauguration was, again, allowing meta platforms to skew further right-wing. X/Twitter skews further right-wing. And it looks like they just neutered TikTok to also skew right-wing. Does that, by necessity, shape the political discourse in the culture? Or do you think that the ring of truth, as it were, will still burn through, especially when it comes to these, heightened political moments?
I think it's the only real hope. I don't think that it can. I don't think that basically it can't be generated from above. When you say narrative, do you mean what people call storytelling?
Sure, but when I say narrative, I'm being more inclusive because I mean memes, I mean spin, I mean insults. Right? Because, narrative doesn't have to be a full story. It can invoke a story.
No, that's the point. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. That's what I was thinking of Innes when you said that. that in the oral tradition, there was no storytelling in the sense there is in the age of print, where you've got within the covers of a book, you've got a real structure, opening, closing, ending, sense of an ending, all of that. And in the oral tradition, it's something like the Iliad starts in the middle and ends in the middle.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the kind of environment that kids are growing up in.
Well, and because it speaks to how AI starts in the future and ends in the future, right? It's always a story that never actually exists in the present. It's always something that's going to happen. And one of the most frustrating things I've had in doing this podcast is, on the one hand, I want to have guests who are going to speak to AI, because part of what I'm doing is building a critique, right? And trying to kind of break it down. But they've all accepted a future that does not exist, and I don't think is going to happen. But they refer to it with such authority, such conviction. And the biggest one is jobs, right? That AI is going to take all our jobs. And I just don't see it on so many different levels. But it's just assumed that there will be no jobs. And I'm just like, well, where do you get that from? Well, Elon Musk says that. I'm like, oh, yeah, you trust that fucker? Right? Like, and this, it's frustrating to me, because this is why I keep coming back down to narrative. So much of what fascism seeks to do is control our narratives and not allow for any alternatives. And as much as I hate the narrative of wokeness, because it is a narrative constructed by the right, it is a narrative of control, right? The way that this issue of gender, like you were talking about Polievre and his smirk, right? He did an interview yesterday on CTV, in which he was like, what, there's only two genders? And did this smirk, right? As if he's negating the existence of thousands of Canadians. And sorry, I'm rambling.
No, go ahead. Well, but I think I find the situation now more hopeful than, I mean, I went through the 60s. That was my sort of, debutante's ball. And I think the situation is much more hopeful now. Because of the spread, the Gaza thing has been very encouraging to me. That if you could break through that narrative, you can break through. Everything is fragile.
But I mean, with that in mind, where do you see the state of Israel in this kind of emerging global order? On the one hand, they seem to have quite an ally in the White House, but on the other hand, they seem to have lost any legitimacy.
I don't think they have an ally. You mean with Trump?
Yeah, I mean, Netanyahu
I don't think so.
thinks
Not at all. No.
Okay,
I think,
please go ahead.
I think he's essentially anti-Semitic, like many of his cohort.
Yeah.
And what his goal, I don't think he has any. Biden was much more of a problem. Biden was of that generation that had sold out almost everything that they'd grown up with from the 30s. And they wanted to feel there was one area of idealism and commitment that still existed, and it was Israel.
Yeah, well said.
Because of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
So,
but you think Trump may not be as effective an ally?
Not into that. Huh. What Trump is into is controlling the region the way they used to control it, via a collaboration between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And for that, the Saudis would love to do it, but they can't do it as long as Israel is slaughtering Palestinians.
Yes. Yeah.
So Trump has to stop that. So in that sense, it's more hope. In the realpolitik of it, it's a more hopeful situation. The other reason it's not going to work is because satellites and colonies are not what they once were.
Yeah.
And they have much more of a sense of autonomy and self-interest than they used to have.
Well, especially the Netanyahu government. They're not listening to anybody.
Well, and I think you're going to find that, elsewhere. You're going to find it with, well, you certainly find it on the level of India is just, willing to go deal with anybody.
Yeah.
And I don't think, and Saudi Arabia is making its own rapprochement with Iran and China. So it's just not a pretty controllable world the way
All
it
right.
is.
So what about Canada then? Because your answer when I asked this the first time was accurate and fair, but it was still kind of vague in the sense that it was anticipating a continuance of the status quo. So if we assume that the status quo is not going to continue, like I, for example, don't think that Polievre, there's a guarantee on Polievre continuing as the leader of the Conservatives. Like, we are at a situation in which all bets are off. And your point about Polievre needs Trudeau, and now that Trudeau's gone, Polievre's strengths are certainly no
Oh, he's
longer
in
as
private.
present.
He's in mourning.
Exactly. And so given this bully that has now decided to kick us around a little, and we still don't know how or when, but there is a lot of rhetoric on the Canadian side of, hey, we can't be kicked around. And I think for some politicians, it seems, especially for Doug Ford, it's an excellent opportunity. Give me some speculation on how you're seeing this play out on the assumption that the status quo doesn't hold.
I just I don't like doing predictions. I've been wrong about everything.
But that's
I
the
didn't see
fun. We know we're going to be wrong.
Oh, it's true. It's true. And I don't know. I think it's very good to actually, to get old and die.
I agree. It's something to look forward to.
And you offer what you can.
Okay,
But,
I'm not going to let you off that easy, so I'll focus it back again. Doug Ford. Where do you see Doug Ford? Because he certainly sees this as an opportunity. How do you see him playing this moment in Canadian politics?
I welcome this, Captain Canada thing he's doing. It's way better than his other thing. He's not going to cease to be a
good old boy.
Well, yeah, and just a facilitator of his. He's not into big capital. He doesn't want Elon Musk up there with him. He wants some realtor in, Brampton or something.
He's happy to be the king of Vaughan.
But
he doesn't need to be more.
But we all have our flaws. Nobody's perfect. We have our flaws.
But do you think he'd follow through on some of the threats that he's been making? Do you think the feds will follow through on some of the threats that they're making, or will they just cave to American power? Perhaps because there isn't the narrative support to facilitate.
Well,
otherwise.
I think that's where some coalition building and could help. But putting on public pressure. The convoy, I don't think was a very majority movement, but it was
fringe.
But it managed to make itself a force that had to be dealt with, and in some ways, Polievre's leadership is a result.
Although, and again, for the record, I'm not endorsing this in the manner that they did. They used the threat of violence, right? Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what allows the right, when they engage in grassroots actions that are comparable to the left, they tend to get a little more traction, A, because the police support them, and B, because they use the threat of violence, which the left used to.
Absolutely.
But hasn't in a while.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's what led to the successes that did happen. I mean, Canada is not a negligible force in the world, and we did have the first socialist government in North America, and somehow or other, I hate the CBC, but it's an achievement.
Yeah,
to have got it going. It was a big fight in the 1930s to get it into existence. It was a mass movement on behalf of the CBC. And look,
you think Polievre will kill it? Because yes, one thing for him to say so,
except for radio. Radio, you would have a violent uprising among those 70 and 80-year-olds who listen to CBC radio. And I think they know that. They're willing to leave it, plus Radio Canada.
I also think some backbench Tory MPs would be in favor of CBC radio because of its reach in small-town Canada and a lot of rural locations.
Yeah, but CBC radio will survive, and French CBC. It'll be that sort of Canadian compromise that does happen.
How you feeling about your Toronto Star column? You still digging it? You're still going to keep doing it?
No, I am. I'm really. I mean, it's a test for me to see if I turn into an old, it'll be the sign when I turn into an old fart. I'll be able to see it reflected
Kind of
back
holds
at
you
me
accountable.
in the paper. Yeah, yeah. No,
Right
no,
on.
it's nice to think, can you still say something? If I surprise myself with what I say, then the readers will probably be surprised.
Are you still trying to, like the old days of Maclean's in terms of the Zionist critique? You're still trying to
Oh yeah,
provoke that kind of reaction? Are
yeah.
you ever
No, I'm
successful?
not trying to. I'm not trying, and I try to be very careful. I mean, this has been very tricky to deal with because, a lot of my friends are Jewish, and that includes comrades, sort
Yeah,
of
yeah.
politically sympathetic people. But there's a carve out for Zionism with many of them. And for a long time, I felt this is inauthentic. They can't mean that they really think that the Holocaust is going to happen again. But for a lot of them, they do. And I think I've had I was wrong about mistrusting them. So then I have to understand, why do they feel that way? And how can I address this? And it's been extremely interesting. I found it actually, and even with my family, I've cultivated non-relations with my family for a long time, but I got into some of it, and it was really quite fascinating. And the ones who I'd thought were the really hardcore pro-Israel and won't hear anything else, a lot of them came through with a lot more um, flexibility, adaptability than I thought. So
And, and
it's been a good experience, and in terms of you know trying to expand my sense of other people.
right on. And the teaching. How you feeling about, the kids of today and your experiences in the classroom?
Really, I've been doing that course that you come to for, I think it's 46 years. It's a half course, so it's not what I really do. But I have never felt that the students differed much from year to year. Young people are still I mean, they're not as open as they were in high school. And in high school, they're not as open as they were in public school. But there's still a sort of openness there. When I started in the late 70s, students used to say to me they really regretted having missed the 60s, which seemed like an exciting era. And I took it on myself to absolve them of feeling badly about that, because I said it was 90% rhetoric and 10% maybe something worthwhile.
And where are we today in that
I
rhetoric,
think I
something
think ahead of
worthwhile
that.
ratio?
I think ahead of that in some ways. Yeah. I
Like
mean, the
80-20,
dogmatism, the what?
80-20,
No,
80%
well, it's a
rhetoric?
different thing. No, no. What I regret for the students I have now and have had most of that time is that they haven't lived through the illusion of thinking you could change the world significantly within your own lifetime. It was
Yes.
bullshit.
Yes.
But but people who were like, I worked with people in the labor movement who were active in the 30s, and they had that same illusion.
Back then.
Yes, and they still said, um, but it really could have happened. And people from the 60s will not say that.
Yeah. Yeah.
They say,
Interesting.
yeah, we just were wrong. We didn't grasp it.
I mean, the
Um,
AI people definitely believe that, right? They believe that they're in a moment where radical change, they are on the cusp of radical change, and there is this manifest destiny that they have to reshape the human race in the face of AI. It's very Christian, it's
well, I think,
very American, and I agree with you that they're wrong. We'll see. I don't think you and I are going to be around a few decades from now, but we'll
no,
see
and
if they
but
come to the same conclusion.
yeah, but the same with thing. Yeah, I think they should get out more often.
I think the opposite is happening. I think that they're getting out less and less.
Yeah,
In fact, they're
exactly,
falling in
exactly.
love with their own chatbots because only their chatbots understand them. The rest of the humans, they just don't see what they see in the future.
What is it that they don't understand about how being a human being is different from being a machine?
The body. Fundamentally, their conception of intelligence is disembodied, versus I think all of science's understanding of the human body is that intelligence is central to our bodies, right?
Yeah, the mental process of being human has nothing to do with the mental process of being a machine.
There is no mental process with being a machine.
But what passes for it?
But that's just it. It's projection. They are taking their own deep subconscious, putting it on the screen and saying, look, the screen is alive, when it's just a magic mirror.
No, I've tried to say that. I mean, I don't understand what, large language learning has nothing to do with how human beings learn.
No, it's a word processor that allows you to put words in the right order if you know how to use the word processor. When I first learned how to type, it was initially counterintuitive because I was used to writing, right? But again, it's these stories, it's these narratives that elevate AI to this godlike status. And look who's hanging out with the president of the United States. So clearly that story has worked for them on a political economic level.
Well, people like to talk. What can you say, and they have a right to. It's one of the compensations for all of the disappointment you come upon in life.
I hear you. I would prefer a different religion, though. Yeah. I mean, as far as religions go, this one seems to be trying to disconnect us from our body.
I don't think, I don't begrudge people this religion. I just begrudge them having, seizing power through it and wrecking everybody else's life.
That strikes me as a pretty big grievance for us to have. Now, our last segment on every episode is what I call the shout-outs segment. And you could think of it as a kind of bibliography that on some level it is designed to acknowledge that we stand on the shoulders of giants when it comes to our ideas, our concepts. So, Rick, do you have anyone you want to give a shout out to, whether living or dead, real or fictional, that you think our audience should know more about?
Oh, well, I didn't quite understand that's what it was. I was just thinking of
if you want to shout out Gideon, you can shout out Gideon. That's cool too.
Of the three little girls up the street who are the daughters of my friends who are just great. They're between about 4 and 12, and they have a grasp of issues like gender that nobody my age or even between them has, and I don't know, I'm just so privileged to be in touch with them. I just love it.
That's a perfect shout out, right? Shout out to the youth. In fact, part of how I'm doing this podcast is I'm using this service called podmatch.com, which has been feeding me all the guests, many of the guests, present company excluded. And I sent a kind of complaint to the company saying, I love what you're doing, but it's all geezers. Where are the kids? Let's get the kids up there. They're the ones who've got some really interesting perspectives and are thinking about the world in novel ways that we should be platforming.
No, old fartism lurks there waiting for all of us. It's if you can make it through without reaching it, it'd be great.
Well, I to your point, when I was young, people would say, what do you want to be when you grow up? And my answer was always old. But at the same time, I've internalized Bobby Dylan's line of those not busy being born or busy dying. So it is a matter of keeping the farts at bay.
Well, Jesse, what I'd say is in this 46-year-long course that I've been teaching, I've had many guests, some of them quite illustrious, including Conrad Black, who came to class at one point. And when you came the first time and you went into your kind of wild man routine, I was thinking, oh, God, what a mistake inviting this guy. And the next week I asked them how they felt, and they loved it. And you are the only person I've asked back year after year.
And the benefit is you get to see the shtick evolve year after year, which is, a bit of breaking
you never
the fourth
repeat.
wall.
No, you've always, you just
but it evolves.
Yourself.
Yes, but to your point, the shtick is the same. The content changes.
Yeah.
But it is fundamentally me indulging my Harold Innis kind of worldview, which I don't get to use anywhere else. I can play the McLuhan stuff elsewhere and get away with it. But the Innes stuff, people can't handle it.
Innes was more radical. Innes actually thought that the oral tradition was a medium.
It is on some levels. Absolutely. Right on. Yeah. All right, Rick, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
This has been another fantastic episode. We've done 2 in a row, which kind of suggests our next episode is going to suck. If you're listening to this, maybe you want to skip it. I can't guarantee. If it works out to be great, again, I'm going to get struck by lightning. Rick Salutin writes for the Toronto Star, where you can read it regularly. Perhaps we'll encourage Rick to maybe start a Substack so he can get his ideas out towards the internet as a whole, although Rick's shaking his head saying, fuck no, not a chance. So thanks again, everyone listening. You can find us on the interwebs. Yeah, that's about it. Jesse Hirsh signing off. We'll see you soon.